Now that Final Fantasy XVI is out of PlayStation jail, more people can finally play this entry in the series. 16 tries to switch things up a little for a mainline Final Fantasy title, while also acting as a celebration of the series as a whole. So today we're going to be going through all things Final Fantasy with 107 facts about Final Fantasy XVI. Let's get started. Number 1. Let's get the really boring fact out of the way. Final Fantasy XVI was originally released as a PlayStation 5 exclusive on June 22, 2023. This was followed by 2 DLCs, Echoes of the Fallen and The Rising Tide, releasing on December 7, 2023 and April 18, 2024 respectively. Finally, the game was released for PC on September 17, 2024. Number 2. 16 is the third Final Fantasy game to receive a mature rating, with the other two being Final Fantasy Type 0 and Stranger of Paradise Final Fantasy Origin. Number 3. Final Fantasy XVI was produced by Creative Business Unit 3, the same unit responsible for Final Fantasy XIV. The game also shares more DNA with action RPGs than traditional JRPGs of past Final Fantasy installments. Number 4. If the action game elements seem to be more in line with what you expect from a Devil May Cry title, there's a reason for that, and that reason is the combat director. The combat director for Final Fantasy XVI was Ryota Suzuki, who had worked as a designer on Devil May Cry 5, amongst other games such as Dragon's Dogma. Number 5. Producer Naoki Yoshida, otherwise known as Yoshi P, was heavily involved in Final Fantasy XIV. Several other members of the team hail from the staff behind Final Fantasy XIV, but are also made up of veterans from the Evolution Alliance games, and as such, a lot of elements in 16 share similarities to those of 14, as well as some nods to games within the Evolution Alliance. Number 6. The lead character designer for 16 was Kazuya Takahashi, who had previous contributions for Final Fantasy XIV, while the logo art was designed by none other than Yoshitaka Amano. Number 7. Yoshi P and the team found inspiration for Final Fantasy XVI in the form of Game of Thrones. The idea was that they wanted to create something that resonated with a lot of people, and they saw how Game of Thrones and A Song of Ice and Fire did that. Number 8. The core team for Final Fantasy XVI had required homework. Buy the Blu-ray box set for Game of Thrones and watch it. They wanted the game to feel like Game of Thrones. Number 9. Before the game was even released, it was banned in Saudi Arabia since Square Enix didn't want to make necessary changes so that it could release in the country, aka they didn't want to censor the game. Number 10. 16 takes place in the land of Valisthea, a region made up of twin continents, Storm in the west and Ash in the east. Number 11. Valisthea is home to mother crystals, towering formations that exude aether, which provide magical energy to the people. These crystals are central to political and military power in the world. Number 12. Icons are powerful elemental beings found on Valisthea. The concept of the summons being icons, with dominant being imbued with their power, is similar to that of Final Fantasy XIV's concept of characters summoning primals using their bodies. Number 13. According to the 1,000 tomes in-game, Aegis are conjured servants or entities of dominance. This term is a borrowed term from the lesser version of primals that are used by summoners in Final Fantasy XIV. Number 14. Icons are connected to mother crystals and their power. The Final Fantasy XVI Ultimania reveal which mother crystals were associated with which icons, and several of these mother crystals can be found scattered throughout Valisthea. Number 15. Drake's Head, which is found in the northern coastline of Storm, is connected to the icon of light, Bahamut. By the events of Final Fantasy XVI, this mother crystal is controlled by the Holy Empire of Sanbreque. Number 16. Throughout the series, Bahamut has always had the ability to cast different levels of flare, such as Mega Flare, Giga Flare, Terra Flare. However, 16's Bahamut is the first to ever use Zeta Flare on screen. However, there was another character in a Square Enix game to use Zeta Flare before Bahamut, and that's none other than Donald Duck in Kingdom Hearts. Number 17. Drake's Breath, located off the western coast of Storm, is connected to the icon of fire. During the events of Final Fantasy XVI, Drake's Breath is initially controlled by the Duchy of Rosaria, but is taken over by the Iron Kingdom. Number 18. Drake's Fang is located within a hollow mountain and is connected to the icon of Earth. Titan is controlled by the dominant Hugo Kupka, who has positioned his castle within Drake's Fang. Number 19. I'm not entirely sure if this is intentional, but Titan's design bears a strong resemblance to that of the armored Titan from Attack on Titan. Number 20. Drake's spine can be found in the northern part of Ash, under the control of the Kingdom of Waloed. This mother crystal is connected with the icon of thunder, Ramuh. Number 21. Drake's eye, which was originally found in the northern territories of Storm, is a lost mother crystal connected to the icon of ice, Shiva. The area in the north had been taken over by Blight, triggering some events that precede the events of the game. Number 22. Interestingly enough, despite Drake's eye being a lost crystal by the events of Final Fantasy XVI, you can still see it in the distance when viewing patrolling the Northern Territories from Cape Orsier in Sanbreque. Number 23. Drake's Horn is another lost mother crystal and was the one that would have been located in the southern part of Ash. This mother crystal was connected to the icon of water, Leviathan. Number 24. Leviathan was originally located in Ash where the motes of water resided. However, due to the extinction of the motes of water people, the icon had been considered lost, only being seen in the murals by the Circle of Malleus cult. This plot thread was further clarified in the Rising Tide DLC, which we'll talk about later. Lastly, Zemeckis Falls was home to a mother crystal connected to the icon of darkness, Odin. However, as in-game lore tells us, humanity wanted to acquire the power of the gods, but the gods retaliated, resulting in the loss of this crystal. Number 26. In Final Fantasy XVI's first DLC, Echoes of the Fallen, it's revealed that the Fallen created an artificial mother crystal in the Dim found in Western Rosaria. This was referred to as the Sage Spire. Number 27. The term Mother Crystal dates back to its use in Final Fantasy XI, where Mother Crystals were associated with plagues. Similarly, this concept was reused in Final Fantasy XIV as well, which, as we've mentioned before, was developed by the same development team that worked on Final Fantasy XVI. But also, when you boil things down, Final Fantasy has always been about crystals, and this is just a return to form. 28. You might be wondering why each of the mother crystals contains the word Drake in them. In-game lore tells us that Ultima then named each mother crystal after the parts of an ancient dragon and left mankind with the legend that remains today. Number 29. The term bearer comes from the phrase bearer of blessing. Unlike the time Final Fantasy XVI was set in, previously in the world's history, being able to bear magic was seen as a good thing. Number 30. Final Fantasy XVI includes a new feature called Active Time Lore. This allows players to learn more about the events happening on screen. So think of it as a Final Fantasy version of Amazon's X-Ray feature. Number 31. The War of the Magi was one of many wars by people vying for control of the Mother Crystals. This war led to the end of the era of the fallen civilization in Final Fantasy XVI, and its story has become lost to history among the modern populace. Number 32. The name War of the Magi isn't the first in Final Fantasy history and has been used in Final Fantasy VI as well. Similar to its modern counterpart, Final Fantasy VI's War of the Magi also spelt the end of an era. Number 33. The village of Moor in the Holy Empire of Sanbreque is a returning name from Final Fantasy V, where that game has its own village of Moor. Number 34. In the DLC The Rising Tide, it introduces the region of Mycedia, located in the northern territories of Storm, where people of the motes of water reside. Number 35. For longtime fans of Final Fantasy, the name Mycedia might ring a bell, as this is a recurring location across the series, first appearing in Final Fantasy II. Number 36. In Mycedia, there's a village named Haven with an area known as Minwu's Cup. This is another reference to Final Fantasy II, particularly the character known as Minwu. Number 37. The relation between Leviathan and Mycedia runs deep, as they both first appeared in Final Fantasy II, making the Rising Tide DLC as a whole a throwback to Final Fantasy II. Number 38. Leviathan's Aegis, Pericos, and Thalasso are references to the familiars of Limlane from Final Fantasy XIV, who share the same names. Limlane is the Watcher of the Seas, similar to how Leviathan is the icon of water, making them both water-based. Number 39. Despite being the main setting for Final Fantasy XVI, Valisthea is just a region in a much bigger world. While other continents and regions outside of Valisthea aren't seen in-game, they are strongly hinted at, such as seen in the description of the Gaia Blade, which states, while common on the southern continent, worship of the land itself as a deity is almost unheard of in Valisthea. Number 40. According to Yoshi P, this was entirely intentional, and as the producer of Final Fantasy XVI explained, it's to tell the story of Valisthea, a land affected by blight. The team chose to limit the setting to a single isolated landmass rather than a global scale, to show that this is an era without modern technology, so things feel isolated. Number 41. This isolation also lent to the lack of diversity seen in the game, which again, Yoshi P stated was intentional, as, quote, our design concept from the earliest stages of development has always heavily featured medieval Europe, incorporating historical, cultural, political, and anthropological standards that were prevalent at the time. Number 42. In the western region of Storm lies the Grand Duchy of Rosaria, one of the factions in Final Fantasy XVI, and the faction that our main protagonist, Clive Rosfield, belongs to. Number 43. The Grand Duchy of Rosaria worships a being called the Founder, which is considered a legendary character in Valisthea, although not much else is known. Number 44. Clive Rosfield is the firstborn son of the Grand Duchy of Rosaria. He didn't inherit the Icon of Fire Phoenix, despite being the firstborn, and as such is looked down upon by his mother, Annabelle. However, he is revealed to be the dominant of the newly uncovered second Icon of Fire, Ifrit. Number 45. Clive's limit break gauges are similar to those found in Final Fantasy XIV, making it yet another element that 16 borrows from 14. Number 46. Jill Warwick, Clive's childhood friend, was the princess of the Northern Territories who were defeated after a failed attempt to invade Rosaria. She was taken in by Lord Elwyn as a ward and is revealed to be the dominant of the Icon of Ice, Shiva. Number 47. Jill Warwick shares a similar role to that of Theon Greyjoy from Game of Thrones, further adding parallels between Final Fantasy XVI and Game of Thrones. In the latter, Theon was a prince of the Iron Islands whose soldiers tried to invade the north but were swiftly defeated by the Starks. Theon was taken in by Ned Stark and was made one of his wards. Number 48. When in Dalimil, Jill uses the pseudonym Jane, Captain of the Red Wings. This is a reference to the Red Wings from Final Fantasy IV. The name Jane itself is also another reference to Jane from the first Final Fantasy. Number 49. Joshua is the second-born son of Elwyn and Annabella Rossfield and is the current dominant of Phoenix. Number 50. This one's a bit of a spoiler to those of you that haven't finished the game. Joshua's alias when hiding, Margrace, is a shared name to that of Al Cid Margrace from Final Fantasy XII. Interestingly enough, the Margrace from 12 is also from a nation named Rosaria, which sounds similar to the Duchy of Rosaria from 16. Number 51. With another mainline Final Fantasy game comes another Cid character, and Cidolfus might be one of the greatest Cids in the series. Cid is this game's dominant of thunder, connecting him with Ramuh, the Icon of Thunder. Number 52. The name Cidolfus can be considered a reference to Cidolfus from Final Fantasy Tactics, who was that game's Thunder God. Considering both these characters have the power of thunder, and that Tactics is part of the Evil East Alliance, it doesn't seem like a mere coincidence. It seems very intentional. Number 53. Cidolfus seems to have picked up a smoking habit, bringing back an iconic trait of Cid Highwind from Final Fantasy VII. Although I don't think it's come back in Final Fantasy VII Rebirth, but we'll see if the third installment will make Cid smoke. Who knows? Number 54. Although used as an alias, Clive becomes Cid to the bearers, making Clive the first ever quote-unquote Cid to be the main protagonist in a mainline Final Fantasy game. Number 55. Cid's adoptive daughter, Midodal Telamon, shortened to Mid, is an allusion to the Final Fantasy V character Mid Previa, who is the grandson of Cid Previa. The Final Fantasy V versions of Cid and Mid worked on creating the fire-powered ships, similar to how the Final Fantasy XVI renditions of the characters would work on the ship the Enterprise. Number 56. Mid's idea of turning the Enterprise into an airship is a nod to Cid Hayes from Final Fantasy III, who literally converted the Enterprise in that game into an airship. Number 57. While talking to Mid after completing her miniature airship, she mentions a character called Bartz the Builder. While yes, this might be a little nod to Bob the Builder of cartoon building fame, she seems to be referencing Final Fantasy V's Bartz, the main protagonist of that game. Number 58. Speaking of airships, the second hideaway, the Invincible, is an old airship. There have been other Invincibles in the past, and this hideaway shares features of both. In terms of sheer size, the hideaway is similar to that of Final Fantasy III's Invincible, but in terms of design, may look more like Final Fantasy IX's Invincible. Number 59. The dominant of Garuda, Benedicta Harmon, has a strong connection with Cid, having been saved by him when she was attacked by bandits. According to the Final Fantasy XVI Ultimania, she becomes a soldier of Alud around the age of 15, where she was given the surname Harmon, meaning the servant of God, by Barnabas. By the events of Final Fantasy XVI, she's risen to the ranks of leader of the intelligencers of Walud. Number 60. Benedicta's servants, Shirada and Superna, are based on the enemies that Garuda summons during higher difficulty fights in Final Fantasy XIV. Number 61. Barnabas Tharmer, the dominant of Odin, was born in the Outer Continents, meaning he wasn't originally from Storm or Ash. Number 62. Barnabas was taught by his mother under strict teachings of the Circle of Malleus, a religion or cult created by the Children of Zemeckis. The Children of Zemeckis clan fled to the Outer Continents after their mother crystal fell. He would eventually move back to Valisthea to Ash once the Blight took hold in the Outer Continent. Number 63. At the age of 18, Barnabas' mother died, which awakened Odin's power within him. It was around this time that Barnabas created Sleipnir Harbor, his most loyal follower. Number 64. Odin's design in this game is reminiscent of Garland from Final Fantasy I. It's even more apparent when looking at the Stranger of Paradise artwork. Number 65. Prince Dion Lesage, the dominant of Bahamut, was created with the idea of being a complete reflection of Clive. He was created as the traditional image of a prince, good looks, iconic powers, and an intellectual. Number 66. While Dion is the crown prince in the English version of 16, the Japanese version is a little bit more complicated. In the Japanese version, he was stripped of the title by Annabella, who promoted Dion as the highest-ranking dragoon, thereby making Olivier the crown prince. This was detailed in the Final Fantasy XVI Ultimania. Number 67. When Ultima utilizes the attacks of the icons Bahamut, Shiva, Odin, Titan, and Ramu, the Japanese version calls out Bahamur, Aizen, Catastro, Hyper, and Spark, respectively. These are all summon spells associated with the Evoker and Summoner jobs from Final Fantasy III. Number 68. However, it's a little different when calling out Garuda's attack. In Japanese, Ultima says Gigametz, which isn't a summon in particular, but a character in Final Fantasy III that transforms into Garuda. Number 69. Spoiler for an integral part of the story, so I'll wait. Anyway, Olivier, Annabella's third son, was controlled by Ultima since birth and was always Akashic. This is revealed in the Final Fantasy XVI Ultimania, and to put things into perspective, Olivier was 11 by the time of the events of the Crystalline Dominion. Number 70. The character Tarja is a healer and is a nod to the classic job White Mage, and it's even more apparent early on when she's wearing her white robes. Number 71. Ralph Ineson voices Sidolphus Telamon, this game's Sid. If you consider the inspirations behind the game, Ralph Ineson played Dagmir Cleftjaw in Ironborn in Game of Thrones. Number 72. Harry Lloyd voices Ultima, the main antagonist of the game. Like Ralph Ineson, Lloyd's also in Game of Thrones where he plays Prince Viserys. Number 73. Byron Rossfield is voiced by 2 actors. This is the case because the original actor, Stephen Critchlow, passed away during production, so Ewan Bailey was cast to record the remainder of the lines. Number 74. Moving on to some music facts, we have the lead composer, Masayoshi Soken, returning as composer from Final Fantasy XIV. Number 75. Soken and his team was nominated for Best Score and Music in 2023's Game Awards. He and his team would deservedly win the award. Number 76. The Final Fantasy Prelude theme returns in Final Fantasy XVI in the form of the title screen track, which is a darker rendition of the Prelude, as well as the track In the Light of the Mother Crystal. That version is a haunting and beautiful rendition of the classic Prelude theme, and honestly one of my favorites. Number 77. Continuing with the haunting theme, the Final Fantasy Overworld theme also returns, particularly in the tracks relating to Ultima. You can hear the Overworld melody when the choir sings. Number 78. The track titled 16 Bells, which plays during most regular encounters, shares an intro melody similar to that of Final Fantasy VIII's Don't Be Afraid, which is its normal battle theme. Number 79. The boss theme calls back to classic Final Fantasy battle themes. If you listen closely to the bass line in the track, you can hear a familiar motif to that of the battle theme from the first Final Fantasy. Bum 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 bum. Number 80. Ultima's Eschaton theme shares a similar sounding melody to that of Those Chosen by the Planet, which is Sephiroth's leitmotif from Final Fantasy VII. Number 81. In Leviathan's boss fight, the section that plays during Leviathan's shield phase shares a similar melody to Through the Maelstrom, which is Leviathan's boss theme from Final Fantasy XIV. Number 82. Let's talk about some Easter eggs. When exploring the fields, there's a chance that you've run into a scarecrow with a familiar looking design. These scarecrows look just like the Black Mages of the past, or, if you're being super specific, they look like Vivi from Final Fantasy IX. Number 83. If you look around the hideaway, you can run into an NPC called the Spoony Bard. This references a line from Final Fantasy IV, where Tella calls a character a Spoony Bard. In 4, this line was meant to be an insult to the character, however it comes off as a little silly, and people have considered it a bad translation. Number 84. The Spoony Bard's name is actually Lucan Larkstongue, which itself is a nod to Lucan of the Circle of Sages from the first Final Fantasy. Number 85. The enemy type Control Node seems to be Final Fantasy XVI's updated version of the control system Omega from Final Fantasy IV. Number 86. In an early cutscene, the Knight of the Blinding Dawn strikes an iconic pose during his entrance. This pose is similar to Kane Highwind, who strikes that pose in artwork as well as for the logo of Final Fantasy IV. Number 87. That's not all! The Knight of the Blinding Dawn's pose is also directly referencing the character art of the Dragoon from Final Fantasy XIV. Of course, is another game in the series that Yoshi P was heavily involved in. Number 88. Additionally, the Knight of the Blinding Dawn was voiced by Robert Vernon, who had previously voiced the Azure Dragoon, Estinine Varlano, in Final Fantasy XIV. Number 89. One of the early battles post-time skip is against Tiamat, a branded captain that Clive fought alongside until you meet Jill. The name Tiamat is a familiar one coming coming from the name of one of the 4 fiends from the first Final Fantasy. Number 90. A pre-order bonus offered to early adopters is the sword Braveheart, which is the sword wielded by the Warrior of Light from the original Final Fantasy. Number 91. The Masamune returns in the game as well. This sword is one of the more iconic swords in the Final Fantasy series, but you may best know it as the type of sword that Sephiroth uses in Final Fantasy VII. Number 92. Now that I'm bringing up Final Fantasy VII and swords, I have to bring up the Buster Sword, which comes to Final Fantasy XVI through the Echoes of the Fallen DLC. This was the sword used by Angeal, Zack, and of course, Cloud Strife from the minigames featured in the compilation of Final Fantasy VII. Number 93. Another sword that returns is the Blood Sword. The description makes mention of lifelong companions who cast their lot with the flames of rebellion, referencing the Wild Rose Rebellion from Final Fantasy II, the game this sword first appeared in. Number 94. And of course, we can't not have a sword from Final Fantasy XIV. Players receive the Cortana as part of the Rising Tide DLC. This sword is the same one used by the Warrior of Light. Number 95. One of the restaurants found in the hideaway is called the Fat Chocobo, referencing the Fat Chocobo summon of Final Fantasy's past. Number 96. A storyteller can be found in Northreach echoing tales of a large chocobo eating a man, which Fat Chocobo does in Final Fantasy III as a means of extra inventory. Number 97. In certain menus, you'll notice that there are pixelated versions of the characters, which is a callback to the pixel graphics of the classic games. These can be seen in the pause menu, save screens, and while talking to Harpocrates. Number 98. In addition to the pixel version of your characters, there are blue text bubbles that pop up when chatting with Harpocrates, which again calls back to the classic text bubbles seen throughout the series. Number 99. During a cutscene early on in the game, Clive can be heard using a whistle sound effect, and it plays the exact same sound effect used when Yuna teaches Tidus how to whistle. Number 100. Notorious marks are unique monsters and bounties found in Final Fantasy XVI. The term originates from notorious monsters from Final Fantasy XI and are similar to them in terms of being powerful monsters that the player can hunt down. Number 101. The notorious mark, known as the Magath brothers, is a reference to the Magus sisters. Their names Sandwid, Sindwid, and Mindwid even mirror that of the sisters Sandy, Cindy, and Mindy. Number 102. The trophy Think Mark, which you get from defeating 10 notorious marks, is a nod to the completely memed moment from Invincible where Mark fights Omni-Man. Number 103. While we're still on trophies, there's a trophy named Shift, which is attainable when you land 15 shift strikes or shift shots combined. People attribute this reference to The Wire, where Clay Davis would say shit. Meanwhile, here I am thinking it's a play on shit. Number 104. A boss character by the name of Undertaker uses a move called Spirits Within, an allusion to the film Final Fantasy The Spirits Within. Number 105. In the final battle against Ultima, Clive says, quote, "The only fantasy here is yours, and we shall be its final witness," which is a direct reference to the name of the series, Final Fantasy. Number 106. The book scene at the very end of the game is called Final Fantasy, written by Joshua Rossfield. Now, I'm curious if this is also a Game of Thrones reference, with the book at the end of the show being called A Song of Ice and Fire, which references the book series that Game of Thrones adapted. And at last, number 107. The ending was meant to be ambiguous, and this is backed by creative director and writer Kazutoyo Maehiro and Ayako Yokoyama, who would not give a straight answer when asked about the ending. To them, it's up to the player to decide what happened at the very end. And that is all for 107 facts about Final Fantasy XVI. As always, we can only fit so many facts in one of these videos, so even though there's so much more, if you want more Final Fantasy XVI or Final Fantasy content in general, comment down below to let us know. Don't forget to subscribe and hit that bell to be notified when we upload next. This has been the Leaderboard, your home for video game facts.